Welcome back to Yusuf Reacts. Today, we're diving into the glitz, glamour, and grit of the 2013 film American Hustle. Directed by David O. Russell, this movie takes us on a wild ride through the 1970s with a star-studded cast and an unforgettable story. Let's hustle right in. Hey everyone, it's Lois, and today we're talking about American Hustle. If you haven't seen it yet, be warned, there are spoilers ahead. So, grab your polyester suits and let's break down this masterpiece. American Hustle is a crime drama that follows con artists Irving Rosenfeld, played by Christian Bale, and Sidney Prosser, played by Amy Adams. The duo is forced to work with FBI agent Richie DiMasso, portrayed by Bradley Cooper, to take down corrupt politicians, including Carmen Polito, played by Jeremy Renner. The film is loosely based on the real-life abscam scandal of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The movie's plot is complex, filled with twists and turns that keep you on the edge of your seat. But what really makes American Hustle stand out is its deep dive into the themes of deception, ambition, and survival. One of the central themes of American Hustle is the idea of reinvention. Each character is trying to reinvent themselves in some way. Whether it's Irving's constant scheming, Sidney's transformation into Lady Edith, or Richie's ambition to make a name for himself in the FBI. This theme is highlighted by the film's period setting, where the American dream seemed within everyone's reach, no matter the cost. Deception is another key theme. The characters are constantly deceiving each other and themselves. Irving and Sidney deceive the FBI, the politicians, and even each other at times. This web of lies adds a layer of tension and unpredictability to the story. But what about the performances that bring these complex characters to life? Let's talk about the incredible acting in American Hustle. Christian Bale is phenomenal as Irving Rosenfeld. He gained weight and adopted a comb-over hairstyle to fully embody the character. Amy Adams delivers a powerful performance as Sidney, showcasing her range and depth. Bradley Cooper is both charming and unhinged as Richie DiMasso, while Jennifer Lawrence steals the show as Irving's unpredictable wife, Rosalind. Her portrayal earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Jeremy Renner also deserves praise for his role as Carmen Polito, the well-meaning but ultimately corrupt mayor. The chemistry among the cast is electric, making every interaction compelling to watch. David O. Russell's direction, combined with a fantastic script and a killer soundtrack, ties everything together. The film's pacing, visual style, and attention to detail transport you straight into the 70s, making it an immersive experience. A con man, Irving Rosenfeld, along with his seductive partner Sidney Prosser, is forced to work for a wild FBI agent, Richie DiMasso, who pushes them into a world of Jersey power brokers and the mafia. A fictional film set in the alluring world of one of the most stunning scandals to rock our nation. American Hustle tells the story of brilliant con man Irving Rosenfeld, Christian Bale, who, along with his equally cunning and seductive British partner Sidney Prosser, Amy Adams, is forced to work for a wild FBI agent, Richie DiMasso, Bradley Cooper. DiMasso pushes them into a world of Jersey power brokers and mafia that's as dangerous as it is enchanting. Jeremy Renner is Carmen Polito, the passionate, volatile, New Jersey political operator caught between the con artists and feds. Irving's unpredictable wife Rosalind, Jennifer Lawrence, could be the one to pull the thread that brings the entire world crashing down. 1978. When Irving Rosenfeld and Sidney Prosser meet, there is an instant emotional connection. Since they can see themselves in the other, in what each wants in life. Both come from humble backgrounds, but are striving for a better life. They embark on a sexual relationship, despite Irving already being married to the brash and uncultured Rosalind Rosenfeld. Most likely he does not divorce her due to his affection for her son, Danny Rosenfeld, whom he has adopted. whom he would not want left alone with his largely unfit mother. Irving tells Sydney about his illegal sideline as a con artist. But to his surprise, she is not repulsed, but rather attracted to the fact besides his legitimate businesses, he deals in loan scams which net him $5,000 each. Sydney believes she can help his scams by pretending to be British lady Edith Greensley, who has London banking connections. In doing so, she does indeed vastly improve the scams and their take. However, one of their targets ends up being Richie DeMasso, a low-level FBI agent trying to make his mark in the agency. Richie knows that Sydney is not a lady, nor does she have London banking connections, but he does believe she is a Brit named Edith Greensley. Richie makes a deal with them to help him nab for additional white-collar criminals in exchange for their release without charges. Ultimately, Richie talks them into bigger fish than was originally intended, nabbing politicians and mobsters as the opportunity rises. Their initial target is a Camden, New Jersey mayor called Carmen Polito, who is trying to revitalize Atlantic City as a gambling mecca, which requires an influx of investments in the millions. But in getting these offshore investments, which in reality don't exist, the bigger fish include congressmen and senators, who may be taking bribes in this revitalization, as well as a mobster named Victor Teligio, the right-hand man of Meyer Lansky. Beyond their marks finding out what they're doing, which could be especially deadly in Teligio's case, their collective problems include Stoddard Thorson, Richie's immediate supervisor, who repeatedly refuses Richie's expensive requests for the wherewithal to complete the sting convincingly. Rosalind, whose own self-interest is her primary focus, even at the possible risk of Irving's life. And Sydney's relationship with Richie, whom she initially seduces to keep him close just in case, but with whom she may really be falling in love. The movie starts with a 70 seconds Technicolor logo of Columbia Pictures, Atlas Entertainment, and Annapurna Pictures. A title caption reads that the following is loosely based on a true story. April 28, 1978, in a suite in the Plaza Hotel in New York City, a fat Jewish man named Irving Rosenfeld, Christian Bale, is elaborately fixing his hair in a comb-over to hide a huge balding spot on his head. This goes on for several minutes. He finally hairsprays it in place. Irving leaves his room and walks into an adjacent hotel room, where a surveillance team is recording the video and audio of another room. Sydney Prosser Amy Adams enters and exchanges an angry look with Irving. It is broken up by the entrance of Richie DeMasso Bradley Cooper, who begins arguing with Irving, saying he got them a suite at the Plaza Hotel and mentions that he's never touched Sydney. There is obviously some jealousy between Irving and Richie over her. As Richie and Irving quarrel, Richie messes up his comb-over, leaving the hairpiece sticking straight up. Sydney, in her British dialect, rushes to fix it. The three walk into a hotel room on the same floor and put on friendly faces. They are meeting Mayor Carmen Polito Jeremy Renner. Richie has a briefcase at his feet and tries to push it towards the mayor. The mayor's associate, Carl Elway, notices and tells him he'll handle it, and Richie rambles that it would be disrespectful to the sheik if Polito doesn't take it. Carmen becomes suspicious, saying he came to meet a sheik. But the fact that a briefcase is being forced on him is freaking him out, and he decides to leave. Richie and Irving begin fighting again, with Irving finally agreeing to mop up the mess Richie caused by being dumb and sliding the briefcase conspicuously. We now go back in time several years and explore the events that will lead up to this meeting. In his childhood, Irving narrates that his father owned a glass business, and Irving notices him being taken advantage of by customers. It convinces him to drum up business for his dad by breaking glass windows in the area with a baseball bat. As an adult, Irving also owns a glass business, as well as a bunch of dry cleaners. At a pool party, Irving meets a nice red-haired girl in a fur coat named Sydney Prosser, who speaks with an American accent. When Irving notices her bracelet has Duke Ellington's picture on it, they bond over their love of the jazz musician. They go upstairs and play one of his records, and Irving's confidence attracts her. Irving and Sydney have a lot in common because she comes from a background of limited options such as a stint as a stripper. Sydney professes that she is a bold person, and Irving praises Sydney's ability to reinvent herself. Sydney has recently started working at Cosmopolitan magazine. Irving knows she is too smart to work at a clerical job. She is broke and fearless, with nothing to lose. Her dream has been to become anyone else other than who she was. So she thinks nothing of going with Irving as he shows her one of her dry cleaning stores. He takes her to the back, where things that were left behind or forgotten are stored. They try on various clothes and end up kissing between the dry cleaning conveyors. A few days later, Irving shows Sydney his office where there are tons of paintings on display. He tells her that his new business helps guys get loans who can't get loans. When he hesitates upon being asked how he gets them money, she realizes he is a con artist who takes his clients $5,000 fee but makes no effort to pay them back. He defends himself by saying the guys that are desperate to invest with him are people at the bottom with gambling problems and embezzling. She points out he takes advantage of desperate people, and he asks if she wants to join him. She walks off without saying anything, exiting the office. Irving goes back to his desk, upset that he has crossed a line with a woman he genuinely likes. Moments later, though, she returns, this time using a British accent, introducing herself as Lady Edith Greensley, who has royal banking connections in London. From this point on, Irving and Sydney become partners. The scheme is simple. Sydney tells new acquaintances that she has London banking connections, so their husbands will overhear and beg her to let them invest with Irving. To hook them, she refuses to help out, making them more eager to connect with Irving. One by one, people come to Irving's desk. Sydney under her alias Edith and Irving convince everyone that they are selective, so all of the desperate men end up begging for Irving to take their $5,000 in hopes of a $50,000 in return. Irving's business triples due to Sydney's close attention to detail. They also sell art on the side. All of the paintings are forgeries, but with the British Lady Edith Greensley alias helping sell them as authentic, each one is sold. Due to their success, they rent out a better office, calling it London Associates in honor of Sydney's fake accent. The two fall in love with each other, go dancing, have sex, and more. In voiceover, Irving admits we're all conning ourselves to get through life, leaving out the ugly truth in his case. In fact, he's currently married and has adopted his wife's son from another man who he loves as his own. In his Long Island home, Irving comes home where he talks to his young son, Danny, who tells him that his mom was late picking him up from school, and that a sun lamp caught on fire that afternoon while she was drinking. His shrew and alcoholic wife Rosalind Jennifer Lawrence is defending herself, saying she put out the fire. The left side of her face is completely red with burns. They quarrel, and she hilariously defends herself every time he criticizes her, blaming sun lamps for being dangerous and saying it probably happens all the time. He tells her he's not happy, and she takes a moment and says that he can't divorce her because then she just might take Danny and never let Irving see him again. She says nobody in her family has ever gotten a divorce, and she won't be the first, and points out that they fight and fuck and that's their thing. In voiceover, he says she was the Picasso of passive-aggressive and was better than any con artist. Meanwhile, Rosalind strips down to her underwear and seduces Irving to get him to forget he is angry with her. Sydney and Irving's operation goes perfectly until they try to scam someone else out of their $5,000. Their victim ultimately is Richie, whom we met at the beginning of the film. He mentions that Lady Edith had done a good job convincing him to come in over there to lunches. Irving gets jealous as they reminisce about their outings together. It is obvious she really had a fun time with him versus just trying to con him. Richie holds out his $5,000 check, but now Irving is suspicious. Sydney finally takes the check instead. When the two try to sneak out of the office, they run into undercover cops. Because Irving didn't take the money, Richie can't arrest him, but Sydney is arrested for fraud. Because she is not British nobility and has no banking connections. Richie shows off his badge, revealing that he's an FBI agent. Sydney is taken to an interrogation room, where she is incarcerated there for 3 days. Only Richie is allowed to communicate with her. She goes stir-crazy given that her cell has no furniture. Richie tells her that Irving is taking advantage of her and puts it in her head that Irving is loyal to his wife and son, and that she is being fooled. He uses the fact that Irving has not come visit her as proof that he doesn't really care about her when in truth, Irving has been forbidden to see her. Richie concludes the conversation by revealing that he has a romantic interest in her. The entire time, she remains speechless, so he still thinks she is British and named Edith Greensley. On the third day, Irving is looking through the glass at the jail cell with Sydney oblivious to him from the other side. Richie talks to Irving about his dishonesty, and then explains that he wants to combat white-collar crime and can, with Irving's help. He wants Irving to help him trap for similar con artists, and if he does, Sydney and he will be free of all charges. Now back home at her Manhattan apartment, Sydney suggests to Irving, and they both flee the country to Romania. But Irving refuses because he doesn't want to leave Danny behind. She becomes accusatory, because Richie has planted it in her head that Irving is just using her and doesn't care about her. She finally agrees to help entrap 4 con artists to clear their names and tells Irving that she is going to get romantically close to Richie in case they need him in the future. Irving, Sydney, and Richie are in an art gallery with an Arab sheik. Irving is rude to Richie, but Sydney defends him. Irving explains their plan by going around the gallery with a wealthy sheik. People who want to sell fake bank CDs and take the sheik's money will approach them for an introduction. Since there are very few con artists who sell fraudulent art, it does not take long to attract someone unscrupulously interested in the seemingly wealthy oilman walking alongside Irving. In actuality, the sheik, a friend of Irving's from Queens, and not a real Arab. Irving shows Richie a painting and explains that it is a fake and that people believe what they want to believe. The colleague from before interrupts, asking Irving to introduce him to the sheik so he can take advantage of him. Irving refuses in the same way Sydney does when she wants to hook someone. This time, it's Sydney that steps up and acts as a middleman between the con artist and their group. In his office, Irving secretly records one of his friends, Carl, asking if he can sell fake certificates and deposits to Irving's investor, the sheik. Sydney and Richie arrive, and Carl is told his appointment is up. All while, Irving is pretending he's not interested in working with Carl. But when Richie helps sell the story of the sheik by pointing out that he is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Carl says he has an investment bigger than bank CDs. The sheik can invest in the rebuilding of Atlantic City, a task taken on by Carmen Polito. At the FBI, Richie's boss, Stoddard Thorson Lewis C.K., tells him they shouldn't try to entrap Carmen Polito, who is also a family guy, well loved by everyone in his community. Carmen had just gotten gambling legalized in Atlantic City and wants to rebuild the city, but is having trouble raising the money. Stoddard says they shouldn't go after a politician. Richie tells him to put $2 million into a Chase bank account under the sheik's name so Carmen can verify that the sheik is real. Stoddard refuses to wire taxpayers' money into an account, even if it's controlled by them. and begins telling Richie a story about ice fishing with his family. He says his brother wanted to go ice fishing in October and their dad said no because the ice was too thin. Richie says he knows where the story's going. The brother was too eager and fell through the ice, just like he himself is too eager. Stoddard said, "No, that's not the point of the story," and tells Richie they'll continue it another time. Even though Stoddard has shut the operation down, Sydney or Edith schemes on Richie's behalf. She becomes friends with the woman in charge of all the wires, Brenda, a lonely cat woman Colleen Camp who is appreciative of Sydney's friendship. They get her to wire $2 million into an FBI-controlled account. Edith then makes sure that Stoddard's boss, Anthony Amando Alessandro Nivola, is impressed with the plan, so that when he calls Stoddard to praise him, Stoddard won't be able to back out of it. Irving is now irritated that Sydney and Richie have made this about entrapping politicians, since he thought they would fulfill their duty with very small criminals. Sydney supports Richie, who is adamant that he wants to think big and use video surveillance to capture big guys and get the glory for it. Irving tells him he's going to have to rent out a luxury suite to trick Carmen Pulido into believing the sheik is real, even though Richie thinks it's unnecessary. Irving then gets mad when he finds out Sydney used her skills to get the bureau to wire $2 million to fool the sheik and leaves Sydney alone with Richie. He straddles her on the table and they kiss, but then retracts, holding just her foot instead. He exits, leaving her flustered. A surveillance video is played of Richie showing the briefcase filled with cash that will be used to entrap the mayor. We are now back at the opening scene, where Carmen gets suspicious and leaves the hotel room. Like before, Irving runs after him. He finds Carmen outside of the plaza on the street, bent on escaping the situation. But Irving convinces him that the opportunity they presented is real, and badmouths Richie as being inferior to them. The two end up bonding as they discover they have a few things in common. Carmen says he was nervous because he was expecting to meet with the sheik, but admits that he likes Irving and therefore will continue business with him instead of Richie. Irving tells Richie that Carmen agreed to go out to dinner with Irving and his wife but doesn't want to deal with Richie anymore. Richie is adamant to be included because he wants to use Carmen to find crooked politicians whom Carmen bribed to pay off people for licenses and casinos. Irving points out that Richie is taking them to a dangerous place. Sydney is more upset that Rosalind gets to go to dinner with Irving instead of her. At home, it's revealed that Richie lives in a decrepit apartment with his overbearing and controlling mother. During dinner with his mother and a fiancé he doesn't love, he gets a call from Sydney, Edith, who is upset about being left alone while Irving is out with Rosalind. Richie agrees to meet Sydney, but before he heads out, he tells his mom how he's going to finally prove himself and no longer be a laughingstock. At dinner, Irving introduces Rosalind to Carmen's wife, Dolly Elizabeth Rome. The four of them have a great dinner. The New York City accented Rosalind is obviously uncultured, but instead of weakening Carmen's perception of Irving, she actually ends up charming the table. She goes into a long story about her nail finish that has a top coat that smells both perfume and rotten, sweet and sour, like flowers with garbage. She eventually gets drunk and falls out of her chair. At the same time, Sydney and Richie are out on the streets of New York. Richie opens up to her that he wants to do something with his life. They end up at a dance club and bond over disco dancing. The moves get steamier and steamier until they are both sexually roused. They cut in front of a long line of women in the restroom and fool around in a stall. But Sydney or Edith decides to wait until the two of them get real with each other before they fuck. She gives him a long kiss before he leaves the stall, but she stays behind to pee, letting out a thrilled scream on the toilet. At dinner, Irving and Carmen are really bonding, singing along to a karaoke song. Next moment, Carmen is introducing Irving to a colleague, telling him that Irving is going to get New Jersey back on its feet by helping rebuild Atlantic City and creating thousands of jobs. Irving begins feeling guilty now that he's getting close to Carmen. The next day, Carmen and Irving are eating breakfast. Carmen talks about how much he loves his community, and he really wants the sheik to realize how helpful his investment is going to be to the people in town. They walk to Carmen's car, and he opens the trunk to reveal a thank you gift to Irving, something that is too new technologically for Irving to recognize. Carmen explains that it's a microwave and it heats up food in a scientific way. Once again, Irving feels guilty, but Carmen doesn't catch on. He just tells Irving not to put metal in his gift. At the FBI, Richie, now in sunglasses and a bomber jacket, is demanding that the sheik arrive in a jet. Stoddard says he should just arrive on the curb at JFK. Richie aggressively points out they should be committed to selling the sheik as wealthy and finally is successful in convincing Stoddard. Richie walks away, but stops to request Stoddard finish the ice fishing story. Stoddard says his brother and he were on the ice, and he saw his father running towards them. Stoddard stepped in front of his brother to protect him. Richie says, "Oh, you were trying to protect your brother, but you couldn't, just like you are trying to protect me. The story is about protection." Stoddard says, "No, that's not what it's about." Richie lives in Long Island. Rosalind is mocking Irving, muttering to herself, "Don't put metal in the science oven. Don't put metal in the science oven." She puts a foil-wrapped tray inside the microwave, and it immediately explodes. Danny shouts, "Another fire." When Irving comes home, he is irritated that Rosalind destroyed the microwave Carmen gave him. But she responds by making fun of him for being in love with Carmen, and says he should get a chain with a gold microwave around his neck. She also points out that she read that science ovens take the nutrients out of their food, and hands him a magazine article to prove it. As he reads, she mutters to herself, "Bring something into this house that's going to take all the nutrition out of our food, and then light our house on fire? Thank God for me." On the tarmac, Richie and Sydney kiss while Irving watches on. She encourages Richie to not be nervous. As he walks away, Irving approaches her, but she wants nothing to do with him, upset that she has to share him with Rosalind. Richie and Irving board the private jet that the FBI has rented for an hour. They meet the fake sheik, replacing Irving's friend, since this guy is with the Bureau. Irving is irritated because he's a Mexican named Paco Hernandez Michael P. and doesn't speak Arabic, although Paco says he knows a few phrases. Irving tells Paco to give Carmen an ornate dagger and present it as if it's a sacred, expensive artifact. Paco points out that the name of the operation is offensive. It's revealed to be Abscam Arab Scam. Irving responds, "What do you care? You're Mexican." The fake sheik greets Carmen outside the jet and presents him with the sacred knife. At home, Rosalind is bitching to Irving that she cannot go to a meeting with him, even though she's already done her hair. She answers a ringing phone, and Richie is on the other end. Rosalind listens in from a phone in the kitchen and overhears Richie talking about feds. After he hangs up, Rosalind asks Irving if the conversation has to do with IRS, a tax thing. The phone rings again, and this time, it's Carmen. Rosalind tells him that Irving isn't letting her come to the event that night. When Irving takes the phone, Carmen tells him that his wife is the life of the party and to bring her. Irving is nervous, telling Carmen that his wife is unpredictable. He's secretly worried that she will blow their cover somehow. Carmen won't take no for an answer. Donna has even bought the nail finish Rosalind had told her she couldn't find. Now Irving has no choice but to bring Rosalind along. Out front, Irving and Carmen bond with Rosalind and Dolly. Their bonding is interrupted by the arrival of Sydney and Richie and the Mexican sheik. Rosalind stares at Sydney and mutters, "I know who you are." She repeats to Irving that she knows who Sydney is. Everybody enters the lobby of the hotel casino. Carmen obviously has a genuine interest in creating a great Atlantic City, more so than making money. He tells Irving that he saved them $50 million by choosing to renovate instead of building from the ground up. They go into the gambling room, where Rosalind glares at Sydney some more. Carmen pulls Irving aside and tells him that he is saving a lot of money by working with casino guys standing at the bar who happen to be the mob. Irving tries to circumvent a meeting with them, but Rosalind, hearing everyone is nervous to approach, decides to cross to the mob guys and say hello. She catches the eye of Pete Musane Jack Huston, whom she flirts with. Irving and Carmen now approach to reel in Rosalind. Richie steps forward as well, introducing the Sheik. The guys at the bar tell them that Victor Teligio, a mob boss, is in the back room and wants to meet them. Irving tries to avoid the situation, but the mob guys insist. Richie, Irving, Carmen, and the Sheik now meet Victor Teligio, Robert De Niro, in a surprise cameo. A mob boss who never buried a body because he felt it left a better message to just leave it in the street. Employees set up a table and they all take a seat. Victor says it's been a dream to build casino resorts on the East Coast. He says even though Carmen made this legal, he has 40 years of history and has to be careful. To get a gaming license and keep it, they will have to make their principal investor, the Sheik, an American citizen. Carmen is asked to use congressmen and senators he knows to expedite citizenship. Although Irving tries to talk him out of doing something unscrupulous because they've become close, Victor is suspicious of Irving's concern, and he points out that they are a real organization, and he hopes that everything else is real. He begins speaking Arabic to the Sheik to see if he actually knows the language. It turns out he's got casino investments in the Middle East, and he spent 2 years learning Arabic to keep an upper hand. Irving and Richie get very scared. Richie tries to intervene, but Mr. Teligio insists the Sheik speak for himself. Someone enters the room, interrupting. Keiko then says, in Arabic, "It'll be great doing business with you. The investment is real. It was a pleasure to meet you." Even though his memorized phrases are not in response to what Victor said, it's enough to assuage his suspicion. Mr. Teligio says they should put $10 million in the bank of his choice in the next 2 weeks, or else they will insult his friends in Florida. Outside, Sydney asks Rosalind to come with her, but Rosalind refuses, calling her husband's whore. Sydney and Dolly continue glaring at Rosalind across the room, while Rosalind and Pete end up bonding over their love of the phrase "what's meant to be will be." Moments later, Rosalind goes to the bathroom. Sydney follows behind, yelling at her for flirting with the mobsters. Rosalind isn't moved, pointing out that she has a ring on her finger. Sydney replies that what Irving and she had might be over now, but it was beautiful and it was real, and they loved each other. This makes Rosalind cry. Sydney continues, pointing out that Rosalind scares and manipulates Irving by the use of her son. Rosalind replies by saying he keeps coming back, so there must be something he loves. Just like perfume that you can't stop smelling even though there's something sour in it. She tells Sydney he's never going to leave her, and she's going to make Sydney sorry for what she's done to her family. They call each other gross, and Rosalind applauds Irving for being consistent, and says, "Sometimes all you have in life are fucked up, poisonous choices." She then kisses Sydney hard on the mouth and walks away, laughing. A dazed Sydney wipes a big lipstick smear from her mouth. In the lobby, Rosalind finds Pete and begins sobbing in his arms. Sydney walks away, turning around to see a very upset Rosalind with Pete. She steps into the back room and whispers something to Irving. The group leaves Mr. Teligio behind. He watches them go. On stage, in a ballroom, Carmen is introduced to the crowd. Irving is flustered from all the excitement of meeting Victor Teligio and takes a pill for his heart to calm himself down. Rosalind walks by him with Pete. Sydney stands nearby with Richie, both listening to Carmen's enthusiastic speech to a cheering crowd of locals. Carmen further reveals that he really loves his community, and that has been his motivation for wanting to restore Atlantic City. Irving goes to one of his dry cleaners and opens a safe in the back. He takes out a lot of cash, as well as a handgun. He then stands inside the dry cleaner conveyor, the location where he first kissed Sydney. Meanwhile, Richie knocks on Sydney's door at her apartment. He still thinks she's Edith, a British woman. Richie tells her last night was insane and calls Stoddard to request the Sherman Suite at the Plaza Hotel, an entire floor. Stoddard refuses. Richie explains that Carmen has admitted to taking bribes from members of Congress, and reveals that Victor Teligio is demanding $10 million in 2 weeks. He becomes ecstatic as Stoddard refuses to cooperate and hangs up the phone. He begins kissing Sydney and asks her to calm him down. He then demands they finally have sex. As they begin getting intimate, she reminds him they're not going to go all the way until they get real. He tells her he loves her and points out that everything has just gotten real. Moved by his feelings for her, they kiss some more, and she interrupts to tell him the truth. That she's an American, not a British woman, as she's been pretending. He is confused. She tells him she's falsified her records, and her name is Sydney Prosser from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He asks why she was doing an English accent after they agreed to be real in the stall. She says she needed the Edith persona to survive, the way he lives. With his mom and fiancé, he doesn't acknowledge and curls his hair even though he has straight hair. She points out we all do things to survive. He says he's confused, and that maybe fucking will help. They begin to kiss again, but she's not into it. To get him away from her, she smashes a small framed picture over his head. Just then, Irving enters. He points his handgun at Richie and asks him to step away from Edith. He reveals he knows she is Sydney and that she is not British. She admits that she told him and doesn't care. Irving tells Richie what they've gotten into is worse than jail, and since they can't get $10 million wired to Teligio, the jig is up. Richie points out that when Teligio finds out he's been had, he's not going to go after Richie, an FBI agent, or Carmen, a politician. He's going to go after Irving and his son, as well as Sydney. Richie calls Stoddard again and demands the suite of the Plaza Hotel and to be told the point of the fishing story. Stoddard replies, "Not the way you're behaving." Still frustrated, Richie asks Stoddard where he is, and upon being told a location, says he's going to go there right now to beat his ass. Irving and Sydney are left behind, terrified, since they are now in danger. Sydney points out she was Irving's lifeline out, and he blew the chance to run away before. She tells him they have to get over on all these guys, and he agrees that, whatever they do, it will have to be the best con they've ever done. At the FBI headquarters, Anthony Amato is listening to a deposition from Stoddard about Richie threatening to kill him. It's then revealed that Richie has, in fact, beat up Stoddard with a telephone receiver, who has all kinds of bruises on his face and a bandage over his left eye. Richie uses the meeting to request the Sherman Suite in the Plaza Hotel. He points out that the mafia and crooked politicians have intersected, and that they can snag all of them with Anthony's approval. Anthony says he won't wire $10 million, but he will pay for the Sherman Suite so they can record congressmen taking bribes. He tells Richie he's proud of him. Outside, Stoddard yells at Richie. Richie only asks how the fishing story ends, and when Stoddard refuses to tell him, Richie says he'll call Stoddard's brother. Stoddard replies, "My brother's dead." Richie then thinks he's figured out the story. Stoddard's brother fell through the ice. Stoddard replies, "No, he died a different way many years later." The ending to Ice Fishing Story is never revealed. Richie makes amends with both Sydney and Irving in the Plaza Hotel. They set up a room in the Sherman suite with hidden cameras. Carmen calls several congressmen and tries to convince them to make investment opportunities. Richie videotapes himself putting bribes into suitcases. They meet various congressmen and a senator, pitching the idea to each one. One agrees to expedite the sheik's citizenship. Several others feel secure in investing because they know Carmen is a good man. One by one, they take all the bribes. Irving feels guilty, knowing Carmen only has good intentions. He steps outside and talks to Sydney, who says the only way to help Carmen is through their plan for Teligio, a plan that makes Irving nervous. Sydney assures him there's only one thing that can mess things up, and that's his wife. Cut to Rosalind dropping Danny off at school and then being picked up by the mob guy Pete. She has her sweet and sour nail finish in hand. Pete and Rosalind go to a fancy restaurant, where Pete tries to convince her to go to Florida with him, leaving Irving behind. Rosalind responds by venting about her husband, explaining that she hears him on the phone, and that he loves Carmen, but hates the curly-headed IRS guy. She expands, explaining that he's in some kind of bind, throwing money to Congress or something. Pete gives Rosalind a huge wad of cash and says he has to leave to talk to his boss Teligio back home. She tells Pete not to hurt Irving too hard. At home, Rosalind goes home and sings along to Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die while she cleans her house. This is juxtaposed with Irving and Carmen ambushed by Pete and taken for a ride. Rosalind tells Danny the truth about his father, and tells him not to repeat it. Outside, a car squeals up onto her driveway. Irving enters the house, yelling at Rosalind, telling her that he knows she was in Pete's car, because she had left her sweet and sour nail polish on the dashboard. This tipped him off to know he was in danger. During the drive, the mob guy in the backseat put a canvas bag over Irving's head and then pointed a gun at his neck. Rosalind defends herself, telling him not to scream at her. But Irving is frantic since he knows how much danger she put him in. She replies, crying, saying she is left alone all day and she just wants him to love her, but since he can't, she's going away with Pete. Irving is concerned about how much danger she'd be in if she moved to Florida with a mob guy. She says she only meets people through him, so who else did he expect her to date instead of him? Irving struggles for a heart pill, and she asks him what kind of trouble he's in. He tells her he has a plan, and it came to him when he was in the canvas bag. We return to a few minutes earlier. Irving tells Pete that he has $2 million out of the 10 that will be wired that week. At home, Rosalind takes credit for Irving getting himself out of a bad situation, saying she knows how hard he is to motivate, and that she knew if she got Pete to knock some sense into his head, he would figure things out. She tells him about a book she's reading called The Power of Intention, and the reason she sent Pete to him was so Irving could come up with the plan. She tells him, "You're welcome," and in disbelief, he thanks her. Rosalind tells him maybe she's a better partner than Edith Sidney, and maybe he underestimated her. She tells him she'll tell Pete she was wrong about the IRS, but points out she was actually right and repeats her the power of intention motto. She then tells him he needs to grow up and face the facts, that they should get a divorce. In voiceover, Irving explains that necessity is the mother of invention, and the FBI is willing to wire $2 million if it means taking down Teligio and his entire organization. Teligio won't meet at a public place like the plaza, but only at the office of his attorney. So Irving, Sydney, and Richie visit a skyscraper in New York with high security. They are finally allowed inside, but Teligio is not there, only his lawyer, Alphonse Simone, and a secretary. Alphonse admits the trip was unnecessary because everything could have been done with a wire transfer. He gives the number of Teligio's account on a piece of paper, and tells them Victor is out of town. Richie is upset and says they were willing to come in person to give $2 million out of respect. Alphonse points out he still has the power of attorney, but Irving suggests they just leave. Sydney and he debate back and forth whether they should stay or not. Irving and Richie start to leave, but Sydney stays behind and suggests they call the sheik. Richie catches on and says they'll call the sheik if Alphonse explains specifically what the money will be used for. Alphonse responds by revealing, "We will guarantee all proper licenses and construction permits for any hotel casino that plans to open before the end of the year. And we'll throw in the customary privileges and protections." Richie asks, "What if there's obstacles? What will you do?" Alphonse responds, "If we have to pay somebody off, we'll pay somebody off. If we have to lean on somebody, intimidate somebody, we'll intimidate somebody." He also adds, "At the end of this, we'll teach you how to skim and make some money on the side. Because we invented skimming and have been doing it for 30 years. This is all captured on a video in Sydney's purse and on a wire in Richie's tie. Richie calls Anthony at the wiring desk with Brenda, the cat lady. Now that they have evidence against Teligio, Anthony, talking on the phone as if he works for the sheik, agrees to wire the money to catch Victor accepting a bribe. The money is transferred. Irving, Sydney, and Richie leave. Richie is ecstatic at getting evidence that Teligio is corrupt. He goes back to the office, screaming about finally getting some respect, as everyone in his office cheers. The recording of Alphonse admitting that they intimidate people to get what they want is played and everyone cheers again. In a great mood, Richie begins humping Stoddard's leg, laughing at him as Stoddard leaves the room, moping. Irving and Sydney drive to Carmen's house. While Sydney waits in the car, Irving gets out and reveals to Carmen that the sheik was a fake and that he was working with the feds. Carmen gets upset, pointing out that he's been a politician for 20 years and that he didn't want to take the money. But Irving chased after him to convince him to do business, even though his judgment told him to leave. Carmen adds that everything he did was for the good of the people of New Jersey, and he had no selfish motives. Irving knows this is true, and says he has some leverage to make it right. Carmen is just upset, pointing out the ceremonial knife he has on display in his living room and how much he's been fooled. Carmen kicks Irving out of his house as all of Carmen's sons and daughters watch from his staircase in tears. Irving collapses on his way back to the car, stressed and fumbling for heart pills. Sydney helps him back to the car. They rest on the seats. She kisses his hand and it's obvious they are in love again. Cut to Richie, Stoddard, and Anthony with accusatory stares at the FBI headquarters. Sydney and Irving stand opposite them. Anthony reveals the $2 million that was wired is missing. An anonymous phone call has told them that in exchange for immunity for Sydney and Irving, and a reduced sentence for Carmen Pulido, they will get their $2 million back. Irving and Sydney refuse any involvement. Richie points out that they can be charged for wire fraud, but Irving points out that it was Richie that requested the $2 million. Irving had tried to convince them to leave, and Richie had given the wiring instructions. Irving also points out that if the public found out about Richie's gross incompetence, the FBI would be a laughingstock. It turns out that when Richie went back to bust Alphonse Simone, there was a divorce attorney there instead. The man Rich thought was Alfonso Simone was actually Ed Malone, the mutual con artist friend who threw the party that Irving first met Sydney at. Richie defends himself by saying he was conned. Irving points out that it makes him look just as incompetent, since he was conned by the very same con men whom he forced to entrap the members of Congress in the first place. He also points out that Richie was only able to find evidence against good guys like Carmen, who were really just working to better New Jersey, and that he didn't get anything on the big guys like Teligio. Stoddard tells Richie he should go home, and that he won't be involved with the case anymore, except for witness testimony. 6 congressmen, 1 senator, and Carmen Pulido are all arrested. Because the $2 million is given back by Irving and Sydney, Carmen's sentence is reduced to 18 months. When the story was written, all accounts of Richie's involvement are left out. He never gets the glory he craved for so long. Sydney and Irving move in together. Rosalind goes on to live with Pete, who tells Irving that Victor Teligio appreciates him for making sure he was free of any conviction, since he never took any money, since the $2 million was wired to Irving and Sydney instead. Before they go, Rosalind gives Irving the sweet and sour nail finish she says he loves. Sydney becomes a surrogate mother to Danny for whenever Rosalind's out of town with Pete. She and Irving get a loan from a bank and begin to sell legitimate paintings. The last shot is Sydney back at her apartment, putting Duke Ellington on the record player and staring seductively at Irving. In conclusion, American Hustle is a brilliantly crafted film that blends drama, comedy, and suspense. It's a story about the lengths people will go to achieve their dreams and the lies they tell along the way. With outstanding performances, sharp writing, and stylish direction, it's a must-watch for any movie lover. So, what did you think of American Hustle? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like,